We're on a mega shuttle with Eggnog, and either he somehow managed to get into a ding-dong with the Cardigans, or he's in a training simulation. Jake appearing on the windscreen implies the latter, and Eggnog closes the program. They were supposed to meet half an hour ago, but Eggnog's been busy training for his entry to Starfleet Academy. Sort of, anyway. He's currently trying to get onto a kind of taster course, something that provides 6 weeks of classes to prepare potential cadets, and failing to qualify for even that will basically kill his application before it gets off the ground. That would please Quark at least, as he's still trying to talk Eggnog out of it. The latest attempt fails, and Quark instead goes off to see why Dax wants him to join a meeting of the command staff. Quark's not the only unusual face invited to the meeting, as new recurring character Lita will be in attendance too, Odo commenting to Bashir that she and Dax have become quite friendly. That's an understatement, it seems, as once everybody's assembled, Dax says the 7 people here are the ones she considers her closest friends on the station. I guess the writers thought Jake would be unsuitable for whatever she has planned. To be fair, that's probably a valid conclusion, as what she has planned is basically possession. She wants to perform a Trill ritual called Jintara, where the personalities of former Dax hosts get squirted into her mates so she can meet them. The volunteers will be conscious and able to take back control if shit goes in directions they don't like, which might be handy as Cisco has volunteered to take on Duran, the host what done a murder cause he was a proper wrong'un. A little persuasion from Dax finally convinces Quark to be part of the ritual too, though that might be because he wasn't paying sufficient attention to realize the host he's being given was a woman. I wonder if he'll adopt the proper Ferengi customs and insist that his body be naked while she's in it. It's time for Eggnog's first test, and O'Brien's applying it in one of Quark's holosuites after some words of encouragement. He needs them too, as his stress test turns out to be a simulation of ops rather than the mega shuttle he studied, a deliberate choice to see how he acts under pressure. We'll leave him to deal with that, while a Guardian, one of the unjoined Trill who take care of symbionts, arrives to perform Dax's Jintara, and we learn it's something they forced on her here because she kept putting it off. Kira's up first and becomes Leela, the first ever Dax host. It's a weird experience for Dax, as along with no longer holding those memories, she can also see mannerisms that she inherited. It's the same for the other hosts, each one introducing her to an aspect of herself in a way that she can appreciate from a new perspective. Quark gets a bit upset and asks how much longer things will take when his operator starts talking about breastfeeding, but it's mostly fine. Duran the murderous wanker is different. He tells Dax that she doesn't compare to any of the other hosts before getting a bit feisty with Cisco's head. Being told Cisco is back in control provides the inevitable switcheroo jump scare, leaving their stunt doubles to have a bit of a wrestle. Dax practices Klingon martial arts though, so it was never really a threat, and Cisco manages to take over again for realsies before she kills him. It's an upsetting experience though, not least of which because Duran was playing on genuine fears of not being good enough to be a host. Curzon, Dax's last host, tossed her out of the program after all, so maybe she never really deserved it. Seems unlikely when he then agreed for Jadzia to become the next host after her readmission, but she'll have the chance to ask him personally as he's currently getting squirted into Odo, albeit with some unusual results. Cisco's a little surprised to have a visitor to his quarters, and even more so at the result of this portion of the Jintara. Apparently, trying to stick Curzon into Odo has caused a blending of the two, not unlike if they'd been joined in the same way that Trill are. He's still Curzon though, which might be why he's blown Dax off to come see Cisco. Maybe it's that which convinces Cisco to go and meet up with her, or maybe it's Curzodo asking about Cassidy Yates in front of Jake, but the result is them going to Quark's. Curzodo can't pass up the opportunity to fuck with Quark and plants a kiss on his forehead before ordering drinks. Dax joining them has Curzodo show off his new quick change skills as Cisco decides to make himself scarce and leaves with the excuse of needing to mark Eggnog's test results. That leaves Dax alone with him, and she tries to broach the topic of her rejection, then readmission into the host program. Curzodo's dodging the topic though, and instead starts a game of Cardi Spin Cash with a suspected hustler. The game goes on long into the night, long enough for Eggnog to be back and talking to his dad. He failed a spatial orientation exam, which confuses both he and Rom, because that's a subject for which he has a natural aptitude. Quark joins in the commiserations, a choice that leaves Rom suspicious, before he leaves to throw out Dax and Kurz-Odo, as it's already long after his closing time. The party continues in Odo's office, Kurz-Odo bringing out a confiscated bottle of booze to drink. That gives Dax another opportunity to ask why he didn't object to her rejoining the host program, but he's evasive in answering. That just makes Dax even more convinced that Curzon didn't believe she was suitable and worried about how that'll affect her when his memories are put back in. All of which won't be a problem. See, Curzon's decided he likes this existence and Odo's in agreement. That's why Kurz-Odo plans to stay joined indefinitely. The memory transfer requires a host to willingly accept them and, similarly, be willing to release them again afterwards. That means there's not a lot the Guardian can do if Odo's decided he wants this. At least it's not harmful to Dax, and eventually she'll find a new equilibrium with the memories that remain. Sisko offers to try and talk Kurz-Odo out of this, an offer that Dax declines. Sisko doesn't give up, though, and presses the issue until Dax admits that she just doesn't want a confrontation with him. He was her assessor, after all, regardless of how that turned out, and there are still some complicated feelings involved. That's something Sisko can understand from personal experience with Curzon, but Sisko knew him better than Jadzia did. He knew that Curzon was no saint and could manipulate people who wouldn't stand up to him. Sisko had to shout him down on a few occasions, but Curzon always accepted when he was wrong. Eventually. And Sisko thinks that's what's happening here, which means Dax can either let it slide or tell him he's being a dick. Speaking of dicks, Rom has cornered Quark, and he's fucking fuming. He knows Quark fiddled the test to make sure Eggnog failed, and Sisko's already agreed to let him retake it. Rom also threatens to burn down Quark's bar if he ever does anything to Eggnog again, and that's not just an idle threat based on Rom nearly murdering Quark to inherit the bar back in Season 1. There's a confrontation elsewhere on DS9 too, and Dax isn't letting it go this time. Kurz-Odo tries to dismiss the conversation, then to be confrontational, and finally surrenders. The truth is, Jadzia was never unsuitable to be a host, but he was unsuitable to be a judge of her because he developed feelings for the brilliant and beautiful candidate he was supposed to assess. Washing her out of the program was his way of getting rid of a problem entirely to do with him, and he says the guilt nearly caused him to resign. Apparently not quite guilty enough to actually do it, though, and her reapplying gave him a free ticket out of the problem, but the shame of it, and of still having feelings for her, is something he doesn't want her to inherit if they rejoin. None of which seems to matter to Dax. Curzon is a part of who she is, and she wants him to return to where he belongs. Eggnog has retaken his bungled test, and he clearly did well enough to feel like he should be wearing the Starfleet cadet uniform that his dad bought for him. There's probably a rule somewhere against plain simple Garak making them, of course, but I imagine it's one of the least illegal things he's done this week. Besides, Eggnog will be entitled to a real one if the course that he's now qualified for goes well and he gets into the academy. While he celebrates, Odo joins Dax upstairs to apologize for how he acted while he was Kurz-Odo. Dax sees the benefits of it, though, not just from learning about herself, but also the chance to know more about Odo. Curzon rejoining her brought along new memories of what it's like to change shape, and Odo now has a greater understanding of why solids enjoy things like food and entertainment too, so we'll leave them to discuss their newfound appreciation for each other until the next adventure. Another Trill episode, and one that leaves us with a lot of questions, but we should get the unpleasant part out of the way first. Curzon Dax was an abusive dick who used his power to vanish his own flaws and destroy the life of someone else in the process. He didn't even feel guilty enough to correct the issue himself, despite the lip service he paid to it, Jadzia instead solving the problem by reapplying. We're led to the conclusion that it's a happy ending and all's well that ends well, and to those who adopt this position, I ask a single question. How do we know Jadzia was the first? Let's leave that and move on to some theory stuff, because we're given a lot of it by this one. First and foremost is the fact that, despite being joined to the Dax symbiont holding Curzon's memories, Jadzia Dax was not aware of why Curzon Dax acted as he did. That opens up a whole load of questions about just how much is passed between hosts, or whether each personality has an element of control over what they share. The whole story simply doesn't work at all if everything gets added to the DAX personality goulash when a host carks it. We already know there's a way of inhibiting host memories, of course, that having been a whole story of its own when Murder Boy Duran started breaking the surface, but this is the first real indication that hosts themselves have an element of control over the process. This isn't simply a deletion either, as Curzon then wouldn't have remembered after being squirted into Odo, so this is definitely a conscious action. This at least ties into things we've heard previously about former host personalities potentially being able to subsume new hosts and take control. The implication then is that each new host doesn't add only memories but also a distinct voice, with the result in a symbiont being not a simple library of accessible data, but something closer to a choir. While we're on the topic of former hosts, we have another potentially far-reaching plot point unveiled in this one. The ritual of Jantara can take a former host's personality and memories and inject them into a non-trill. It seems to be a lesser version of joining, a host having the final say on what happens, but it's one that doesn't require a symbiont in the recipient, and that opens a lot of possibilities. We've learned here that former hosts retain any memories gained while squirted into a non-symbiont body. We've also learned that there's no time limit on them remaining beyond the permission of the host. That means a former host of a symbiont could then choose to live out another life in a different, willing body and return to the symbiont near the end of that body's life, only to be squirted into another one. The potential for abusing that option is obvious. What if a rich host dies and, after the symbiont is implanted into the next, that rich former host arranged to have themselves transferred into someone else? It wouldn't take much to convince somebody who doesn't live a privileged life into a body-sharing arrangement. How many people do you know that would give up half their days in exchange for opulence? And that's a system that some people could argue was for the benefit of all Trill. Why should their society lose the greatest architect they've ever had when you can just decant them into a spare body every time you want a new library or concert hall or public toilet or whatever? It's another reminder then of why the Trill have such strong social taboos about past lives. Something that sounds good on paper is opening the door to social stagnation at best and full-on despotism at worst. In many ways, the cultural aspects that govern Join Trill are just as interesting as the physical implications. Just a couple of other bits to touch on then. The first is learning just how much pleasure it gives Odo to change shape. His appreciation for it is presumably due to his revelation on the Founder's homeworld, something that also resulted in him requesting quarters so he had a place to explore, being new things. This is the first time it's been stated that he enjoys it all, though, rather than just experimenting, and suggests he's coming to terms with who and what he is. It's a far cry from the embarrassed and ashamed lab specimen that he used to be. Finally, there's a throwaway detail near the start of the episode. Ending the holosuite program Eggnog was in while sitting down caused him to fall on his arse, and that has some implications. It suggests that either the mortality failsafes do not apply when closing a simulation, which raises some very interesting questions for mountain climbing software, or that the computer calculated bruising his arse was within acceptable parameters. That latter point opens up yet more questions on how hurt a holosuite user is allowed to get before the system cuts in, but more interestingly, it gives us a further question of why that's the case at all. In a system designed to mimic reality down to the last detail, users learning to associate absolute safety with activities that are dangerous in real life might have some unintended psychological consequences. End of episode.
I get the feeling you blame me for this one.
It don't matter, it's done now.
In my defense, I don't think anybody could have guessed that Siegel Ducat was in Odo's pocket.
I don't want to hear it. It's my own fault for not letting it go. Should have just assumed everybody's corrupt, then I can't get it wrong.
Is this it then? Are we calling it a day here and moving on?
Yeah, might as well. We really are out of options now, and that miraculous plot advancement I was expecting clearly ain't gonna happen.
You're right. Maybe it's for the best. On the plus side, I can free up some network storage by finally deleting the video of Mr. Morden offering us the job.
Hold on a second. You fucking what?